Hi there, guys. This is me sitting in my little studio here, as you can see over my shoulder. I'm going to do some self-directing today. Got my trackpad connected up to my thing. How you guys doing? So today I thought let me come live, chat about a couple of stuff I've been following in on the. See, I'm directing my own self, so I hit the wrong button. So it happens when you talk and click buttons. I've been following some chats on Facebook and different guys. Goodall asked a question about panning the other day, and I thought, let me just talk about a couple of basic panning tips and tricks. We've spoken about it on some of the other shows. If you remember in season 1, we had some long discussions about numerous things. So the scenario about mixing is always one of those phenomena, in those movies where they say life is about one thing, but they never tell you what that one thing is. And I think mixing is like that for a lot of people. I mean, you strive at something for years and years and years, and you're improving, you're developing skill, you're doing different things, but there's no one word to define mixing in. The whole word mixing means mixing. It's just the word explains itself, but what does it mean for what we're trying to do? And I think if you go back to some of my previous shows, I'm sitting here with two speakers. Get my fingers on them. My two speakers behind me. Got my S6L there set up in the studio. But mixing is something that the one thing I would say that helps you develop your mix is a plan. And that sounds silly, but it's the same as in cooking and recipes. But having said that, if someone doesn't know how to follow a recipe, you can give them a recipe for whatever you want to give them, and they're going to get the ingredients and throw them all in the pot. There's a step-by-step process as well along with the recipe. Most recipes imply that you do things in a certain way, but that's all good and well said. But when you come to live sound especially, the time is the one element you don't have. You can't do this for 10 minutes, then do this, and then get this ready, and then you do that. And, the audience is there, the band's about to start or have started. What do you do? We've all been in that festival vibe where you walk up with the band, and often you're on stage sorting some stuff out. You run to front of house, and pretty much as you get there, they need to go. The MC's handing over whether you guys are ready or not. And, whatever you then do, you're mixing, so it's your fault. Whether you just walked up to an unflushed toilet or a clean desk, it's completely your fault because it's your job. So the question is, what do you do? What's your plan? What's your plan of action? Now, if you're starting to mix in your head when you get there, that's when you've lost the plot, because then you're going to panic and reaction mode. You need to have a plan of action, even at festivals. That's one thing, that there's no excuse for not being ready. Obviously, at a festival, you're not going to get the exact layout you want. You're going to often work on a shared console, especially with some of the smaller festivals and stuff. But your preparation is not about what's currently on the desk. Because what is the desk? What is this desk capable of? What have they followed in terms of my patch list? What does the PA sound like? I've often said when I get to a festival, especially, I try and get there as early as I can if I'm not traveling with the artists. Traveling with the artists is always a big of an issue because they sort of get there on time. You don't have time to get your own buffers going. Try and get there early. I park. I generally don't take the planned route to front of house, which is down the middle, or a set route that they've got for you. I try and get into the crowd on the side, sort of where the boundary of the crowd is, and I'll make a big arch circle, probably about the distance from the PA that the front of house is, all the way back to front of house. So I'm following and I'm listening to the PA, regardless of what the act on stage is, whether it's a band or a DJ or anything like that. Obviously, you listen to the voicing of the PA, how the bass response is going, some nodes, you can hear with the effect of the power alley by the time you get to the middle. Is there power alley? Have they set it up correctly? Have they done some, is there any phasing issue between the side fills and the front fills and the main hangs? You're listening and you get to front of house, and if there's a guy mixing, if it's a festival, he's mixing a band, whoever the guy that set up the system is probably there. He's not mixing, so you can chat to him, introduce yourself, have a look at what's going on, have a listen, get yourself in a headspace, and you start planning what you can plan. You sort of get everything in your basket. So by the time it's your chance to step up, you've got as much information as what you can possibly get to prepare. And then obviously once that's happened, that's when your skill set kicks in. You can have as much information as you want, know the desk as well as you want, but if you're not experienced with the band, especially if you don't know the band's style or the band's music, you're fluffing around, you're not really in context with what they're doing. Often whatever the people are looking at is what they want to hear first. So if you're traveling with a well-known artist, in the first 2 bars or even first half of the first song, the artist and the crowd screaming, they're the ones in focus. The quality of your kick drum, as long as it's there, but that nice little reverb that you wanted on the BVs and the this and the that and all these little trinkets, they're cool and people will notice them. But if they're missing in that first half of the first song, that's nothing compared to you being late on your main vocal and late on your main instrument. If someone's playing guitar, or if there's a piano accompanying them, whatever they need to get off the bat. If you know what the first song is, it's one of the pieces of information I always get. Ask the band, what is the first song we're doing today? Because I know the song, so I know that in that song X, Y, Z, even in order of them playing. If the song starts with a count in, drops into a groove, bass line, my rhythm section's got to be there. But if the song is a ballad that starts with piano and a bit and then the drum swells in, I got some leeway there. So it helps knowing these things, because obviously my time, and when I say first half of first song, I'm talking about 2 minutes. If you've just walked up, or you need to come in and do stuff and get yourself ready. So focus is on what the people see. The question yesterday that I saw on Facebook was, how do you pan? Do you pan from the drummer's perspective? Do you pan from the audience perspective? And I just said context. If you're doing a festival, you give the people what they see. Obviously, if you're on stage and doing monitoring, like Andreas was saying, then you pan according to what the guy's feeling. You don't want to floor tom here if you're hitting at this side, so you cross your pan. If you're doing front monitors from front of the house, just unlink your pan from your aux ends and do it differently. So there's things to be aware of, but give the people what they want. If you're doing a studio album, often they take drummer's perspective if there's no visuals involved. If you go to a live DVD recording, again, visuals are key. If they're an over-shoulder shot on the drummer, you might have some automation where your left and right has to swap slightly for that shot, because the next shot's from the front, and again, visually it needs to make sense. And you can do that stuff in post-production quite easily. I tend to want to mic my overheads quite close, because I'm not going for a stereo effect as much as I'm going for the instrument. Crashes and ride, especially depending on what kind of gig you're doing, the ride is important. So if there is 2 overheads, adjust them so you can hear everything, but rather get closer. That big opens 1.5 meter away, nice full drum kit sound, that's great, but there's a guitar amp right there, and there's a keyboard there, and there's people screaming. So how much of that is effective? So I'd rather go close. Signal to noise ratio is key, but it's about context. And then the other thing I wanted to say about mixing, having a plan, being in context, is obviously, and I've said this a million times, your skill set based on the gear that you're using is a given. If you get booked for any artist to either go on tour with them or to play a show with them, you get booked because I like what you're doing, but you can only do what you do well if the tools that you have available to you is known to you. If you've got privilege enough to say, listen, I want to work on XYZ console, and they give you XYZ console, then you don't have a problem. You're going to perform. But if they only have an alternative, you need to know that alternative just as well as your preferred one, so that you can have a simulated workflow. And I say simulated because one of the things with the manufacturers, they change things slightly to make them unique. So the way you would work on a Yamaha, and the way you would work on an Allen Heath, and the way you'd work on a Soundcraft, you can get similar workflows, but you have to adapt a little bit to how the layers work, how the layouts work, what your function keys are doing, all this, the type of effects that's working, all that kind of stuff. But it's just up to you to develop your skill and get your head into that. I'm going to just check in my WhatsApp group. Those of you that aren't aware of the WhatsApp group, we've got a WhatsApp group going. There's already a comment in there about miking drums with only 4 mics. It's not about the quantity of mics, it's about the context again. So I've done a drum kit very successfully with 3 mics, but it was a jazz context. 2 Neumann large diaphragm placed relatively to how the drum is playing, so not necessarily overhead. I had one underneath these right elbow, and the other one was sort of between the two toms, and I got a nice image of that, and a kick drum mic, and I was sorted. If you've got a fourth mic coming in there, you probably want to bring in some definition on the snare, but it's all depending on the genre. If you've only got 4 mics, miking your toms and your hi-hat is a waste. Snare, kick, and overheads, but overheads placed and listened to. So you put them up, you let the drummer play, and you move them so that you can balance out the sound you're getting between your hi-hats and your toms and all those kind of stuff. Obviously, some things are louder than other things, so you might want to go a little bit further away from your cymbals, close to your toms. So your stereo image sort of goes out the window in that context. If you're recording like that, again, if it's in a studio, 2 microphones, 2 of the right microphones can get you a really nice kit sound, with a bit of an add-on of a kick drum, things like that. So it's always context. Those who know me well know that I use that word to death, but that's what it comes down to. People ask me often, what's my preferred PA system? And I don't own a PA, so I sub-hire PAs when I do larger gigs. We've got small stuff for little corporates and things, but if I'm going to do a stadium or whatever, it depends on the genre. If I'm doing a classical gig, if I'm doing a gospel gig, if I'm doing a rock and roll gig, all that, I know that certain PAs, with the way and the style that I mix, also with the console that I use, perform in a certain way. So then I'm privileged enough to say, okay, well, let me get a quote, let me use X PA. I love the sound. There's some PAs that I just, I've listened to some reference music on, which are like the Alcons, the LR 16s, a very, very nice sounding PA, but not an aggressive PA. So you're not going to do full on rock and roll. You can, I'm not saying you can't, but it's not naturally inclined to that. Whereas if you take something like a Maya sound, Maya's very in your face, very aggressive, quite easily. So if I want to do a nice soothing, orchestral jazz thing, I'm going to have to work at it to smooth it out. Whereas if I went to a different brand, like old school Nexo Alphas, nice smooth sounding PA, or the turbo sounds, floodlights, things like that, they naturally sound quite sweet because of where they go and how the voicings and the boxes are working, and the crossover points into the horns and the drivers and those kind of things, which all has a play in what the texture of the PA is like. So, but it's context. Same thing with mixers. If I can if I can use my S6L on everything, bonus. It's big. It's a little gig. It's a bit big to get in there. Costing's not there. Quoting's not there. Traveling is an issue. You need one van just for the console. There are some consoles where, with certain artists, is just a no-go, and it's not because of my preference. It's because of the limitations of the console. If an artist is capable of performing in a certain way where the mic preamps just can't handle or give me what I need from that artist, I'm going to choose not to use that. Or if I'm traveling with a little band, there's some technical limitations with certain consoles, which are great little consoles for small companies and corporates, but they don't work with bands. We often get that when we do something like Blue Bamboo on a corporate. They've planned on a little LS9 or a Soundcraft or something, some small console, and small in terms of frame size because of front of house. They've got a couple of podiums and all that, and it works great for the corporate. It really does. It serves its purpose perfectly. They can record, they can do all they want. I come with a band in, now they go, well, I've got extra X amount of channels. It's not about the channels. It's the workflow, it's everything else about the console. So it's easier to put down another console next to theirs, feed into theirs, and run the show that way to serve the purpose. So, it's all to do with why you're doing it, what you're doing, what's the context that you're doing it in. I hope that makes sense. Context. So I'm going to try something here with my mixing. I'm going to do that. There you go. You can see me in the little corner there. Get rid of that. No, I'm just getting annoyed. But yeah, I think I've said everything I wanted to say about mixing. It's planning. Well, not everything I wanted to say. I can, if this was a conversation with someone, we could talk for hours and hours. I think it's nice to having the difference of opinion. The one thing with mixing, having the plan, having an idea of where you want to end goal in mind is 100% important. Otherwise, where you're working towards, and that end goal needs to be again in context. If I'm doing a 45-minute set with an artist at a festival, it's all about the vibe and the impact. It's not about the 100% precision on the feedback, on the delay, and the. If it's important for an aspect in the song, yes, but as long as I've got a reverb, got an echo going, drum kit sounds amazing, then it sounds amazing. If the impact is there and the flavor is there, you're working within your set. You can't just go, well, I can't work like this. This is not what my band's supposed to sound like. By the time you have that argument, your set's finished and you've lost your audience. So go with the audience, go with the context. If you're setting up your own show and you've got a day of rehearsals in a theater or something somewhere, that's it. Spend your time. Do your virtual sound check. Paul saying also in broadcast equipment capability. Again, if you get booked for something, or you get put in a situation, your skill combined with the gear that you've got is vital. But in mixing, I would spend most of my time in structure. It's my approach to mixing. So I would make sure that I get my layout right, which starts all the way from my channel list. You don't want to cross-patch too many things because of fault finding and all that. So I start with structure. Then I've got a set workflow in my head in terms of how I utilize VCAs and groups, depending on how many I've got. Even if I always start with 8 in my head, because you're going to get 8 of them most of the time. I've got 48 behind me, but that's just the luxury. So in that 8, it still represents my 8 main VCA uses. And if I get more VCAs, all I'm going to do is within those groups of VCAs, I will expand. So I've got a drum kit. If I've got enough VCAs, I'll separate the groove from the rest of the percussion kit. If I've got enough, I'll do a kick, snare, hats, toms, cymbals, overheads, and then bring them all back into one again. So drum kits. That's 4 VCAs just on drums, if I can. It all depends on what the gear can do. But it's structure, it's layout, which means I'm familiar with where I want to go on the console. And then it's just cleanup, filters. Don't underestimate the value of doing your filters properly. If you've got X amount of mics on a stage, that individually they all work, but the summing effect of bringing them all in, dirt on the low end and all that, use your high end and your low end filters effectively according to the source. Sometimes if you're only doing front of house, in other words, you're not sending to monitors, you can get more aggressive than what you think you can with some of the filters within context, because nothing's getting isolated. You don't press solo on the acoustic guitar halfway through a gig. It's in context. As long as the guitar's bringing across the essence of what they want to do and it sounds good in the mix, who cares if the low pass filter is sitting at 116, or even higher, and they go, yeah, but that body sounds amazing, but he's not playing there. There's a bass guitar on the gig. There's a keyboard player with 6 left hands. There's that kind of stuff. So make space. The more space you make, the more cleanup you make, the more easier it is to get your balances going. Panning comes into play. Panning is an interesting one. I say pan according to what you see, but if you think about it, hard left, hard right in a live gig is a waste of time. And a lot of guys say, no, never pan anything. I'll pan a little bit. Keyboards are by nature left and right, and people patch them left and right, and they hard pan left and right. But even there, if it's my main piano, panning hard left and right on a festival type scenario, how many people actually hear that? Very few. You and a little triangle of people. And by the time they pass front of house towards the back, the level between left and right is pretty even, so it just sums together, so panning is a waste. People sort of in line with front of house in a small section can hear it. People far left, far right, hear far left and they hear far right. The minute the difference between the two sides is more than 3 dB, you can't distinguish the quality of that kind of mix. So you got to decide, do you want to be panning? If it's a really large setup with a lot of well set up PA, outfills, front fills, all that kind of stuff, I'll often do a right left across the front of the PA. So my left furthest outfill is actually a right signal, then a left signal, then a right signal, then a left signal. So I've got different stereo points throughout the place, but then still, because the reason I want to pan slightly is space. The more things on top of each other, the less space you have. When you start spacing them out, you get a little bit more leeway. So panning can get useful for that. But again, preference. I'm not saying pan. I'm not saying don't pan. I'm saying use your brain. If you're staying in context at a festival, running around, you don't know what the PA is doing, you haven't done your tests, don't pan, stay middle. Because that's what at least you know that everybody will hear something similar. And I'm saying similar, I'm not saying the same, because it is similar, because everybody's standing in different spaces. Studio mixing and album and streaming panning and all that, again, I mean, a lot of people listening on devices and things, they walk around with one earpiece, or they walk around with, or they listen on a speakerphone that's just summing the things, or a laptop or whatever. So stay in context. Get your structure right, stay in context, and go with what you see. For the live scenario, it's nothing worse than an audience member will always look at you when something's out of place. What's wrong? What have you done? Which is not having the lead vocals upright, can't hear a solo, can't hear this. And it's not the quality of what they can't hear, it's what they can't hear. So when they look at a stage and they can't distinguish, or they're familiar with the song but things are a little bit out of place, people will go, sounds a bit weird. A lot of bands do songs differently on purpose from what they are at the album, but then they make the impact and it sounds amazing. You work with that. Don't try and recreate something that's not there. End of the day, garbage in, garbage out. As much as what we've said, as much as what you've planned. If there's three carrots and a pawpaw on stage, you're not going to get lemon meringue pie. That's what it is. So you're going to get what you get. Your job is not to produce. Remember that. If you're mixing front of house, you're not producing the band. They're producing. You're reproducing it to the audience. And you're taking what they're doing, getting it to the audience, and applying it within context. The dynamics and all that should be within the band within a reasonable amount. They can't just all play like they want and ignore the rest because I'll fix it out front, because then how are you supposed to interpret that? Because every 5 seconds you're going to make a change. This is where the most common way to describe that is the rhythm section, your drum and bass. If they've played together and they're tight, if I take Theo Klassen and David Klassen, brothers, those two, drum and bass, it just works. They know each other's heads, and there's a couple of combinations like that all over the place. And you get some really pros out there that lock in and sink in quite quickly because they understand the concept. Then your rhythm section just works. But if you've got a bassist or a drummer and the one's trying to lead the other one and the one's not listening and the bassist is trying to, you feel that disconnect out front, and you never get a balance. Your kick drum and your bass is just not, you can't find the right level for this. It's just, you're a panel beater. You're not an artist anymore. So garbage in, garbage out, beauty in, beauty out. There's often times where, even on a festival when I've mixed a couple of bands, the one band I'm going and I've done everything I just said, and it's just like, oh man, I just can't. I'm struggling. And then the next band comes up and I go, oh, what happened? It just works because they're doing the job, and that's what we want. Mixing for certain bands is just you get goosebumps before you've done anything, and you feel good about it. I think that's a privilege that a lot of people have at some point, and it comes with time. Some of the younger bands, it's just nerves get in the way. They sound great, but then you put them on a big stage at a big festival and adrenaline kicks in, and it's just like, pedal to the metal and off you go. But they'll learn. I think I've said my say for today. That's 25 minutes. Bullying advice, I sort of answered that, how to pan for live stream or for TV. Most TVs have some stereotype of effect. The one thing to watch out for, pulling, if I can say that, and I've done this in broadcast, is some of the encoding and decoding that happens, the extremes get messed up. So what happens is, if you've got someone at home that is getting a stereo signal, but they've gone to Hi-Fi Corp and they've bought a new Samsung 5.1 system, and they've actually put the speakers in the right place instead of just underneath the TV, which is 90% of them, and they go and they hit the Pro Logic button, or that surround button, which takes the stereo signal and makes it surround. And what it does, it takes the left, right, and it looks at the extremes and throws them in the rear, and it looks at this, and then it takes the summing and throws that down the middle, and it takes a low pass filter and throws that to the sub and all that. So it's taking what you've put in your mix. So if you're doing broadcast or live stream and you're hitting those kind of people, if you're aggressive on your keyboards, for example, and you hard pan left and right your keyboard player, where do you think, depending on, and remember, a keyboard player is not, it's not a cut down the middle, it's as they're playing to the sides. You know, it's simulating a piano. So when they run up the style, you suddenly get weird piano sounds and synth sounds, especially if they go to a piano with a strings pad, and the string pad has got some really high sizzles and stuff in it. That's not all in your surround and your rear speakers because of the way the processing's happening. If it was a true 5.1 mix, obviously you got control of that. So I tend to set my pan divergence to at least or maximum of 90% when I do the voice and all these kind of things. I don't. So when I pan hard left and hard right, it's never actually hard left and hard right. I've sometimes even done 85%, which means I'm away from the edges. And that's still enough to get a decent sound going. If you do a 5.1, then you put the mics where you want them. I'll crowd. I'll say again the feel of the crowd, most of the crowd behind you in the room, that kind of stuff. There you can do your panning right. But you got to take and consider the consumer. The consumer is the person absorbing what you're doing, and you don't have control of that. You never know what they're listening on. Like I can say, you're doing the best mix you can, and how many guys have you seen walk down the street or holding a Samsung or an iPhone or whatever, and they're listening to R&B off of those little speakers. Now, no one mastered for that context. They mastered, headphones. The speakers emulate quite a bit of stuff, but end of the day, you're not in control of the consumer. But the consumer accepts that bad quality because of the context, unknowingly, but that's it, So think about the consumers, take it from there, and you'll get on the right track, put it that way. And don't be scared to go back and listen, Listen to a bunch of different platforms. If you're going to do streams, do a test stream, go listen to it on headphones, listen to it on laptop, listen to it on speakers, on TV, on a whole bunch of different things, and listen on how they interpret that. But that's a good question. Okay. I don't know if there's any other questions I've missed. I see there's a special Stage AudioWorks is having a sale on between the 12th and the 16th. For those interested, go check out Stage AudioWorks' website. It just came up on my screen over there. Otherwise, enjoy, guys. I'll chat to you again. Sorry, the last couple of weeks have been crazy. I've been lecturing and all that kind of stuff, so I didn't get a chance to do a chat. But if there's anything else you guys want to bring up or want to discuss, or someone that wants to do a bit of a back and forth with me, just give me a shout and we'll get that going. Thanks for watching, guys.